In the novel Las Sergas de Esplandian, author Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo describes an earthbound Eden full of priceless treasures and beautiful shoreline. Its residents were said to be exclusively Black women warriors who rode a mystical lion-eagle hybrid known as the Griffin. In the novel, if a man somehow stumbled upon this society, he would become food for the creatures. This is extremely metal, right? Like something Zack Snyder would film someday. De Montalvo named this paradise California. And since Las Sergas de Esplandian was published around 1510, that was likely the first time anyone had ever heard or seen the word. I'm Erin McCarthy, editor-in-chief of Mental Floss, and I promise we'll circle back to California in a bit, but since my brain demands organization, this episode of the List Show will tackle the origins of all 50 state names in alphabetical order. A note on pronunciations. We did our best to honor the correct pronunciations for all of these words, but there weren't resources to confirm all of them, so in some cases, we're making an educated guess. With that out of the way, let's get started. There are several possible explanations for the origin of the word Alabama, but virtually all of them can be traced back to a Native American tribe known as the Alabama. The Alabama River was named after them, and so is the state. Though some initially believed the word meant "here we rest," that's never been confirmed. It's more likely the tribe was named by the neighboring Choctaw. One Choctaw scholar has indicated Alabama means thicket clearers, with alba meaning vegetation and amo meaning to collect or gather. The largest state's name likely comes from the Aleut word alakshak, meaning the mainland. The Aleuts, or more properly the Unangas or Unangan, are still in the state, by the way, along with many other native cultures. According to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, there are 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska, and indigenous people make up over 15% of the state's population. Headed to the Grand Canyon for a visit? You almost had to say you were visiting Pimeria or Gadsonia, both names that were under consideration for the territory now known as Arizona. The name may derive from the Otham language phrase Al-Shon, or place of little spring, but other historians have noted it could have been inspired by the Basque for good oak tree. Weirdly, you can also check out the London Bridge while you're there, because in the 1960s, London decided to auction off their bridge, and it made its way to Lake Havasu City. Sort of. According to Arizona Highways, it's the original skin with a new skeleton, because all of the load-bearing bits are new. We know Arkansas is pronounced Arkansas, but that wasn't always universally agreed upon. One senator preferred Arkansas in the 1800s until a resolution was passed. Either way, it was a Native American tribe known as the Quapaw who inspired the phrase. So why isn't it called the state of Quapaw? Indigenous people in the Ohio Valley called the Quapaw Arkansas, which was seemingly their name for anybody from that branch of the Siouan family. And then indigenous people from the Ohio Valley region were guides for early French explorers and settlers and handed off the name, who then handed off the name to English speakers. And you'd better get it right, as it's technically against the law to say Arkansas once you cross state lines. You'll recall from the intro that California was a fictional rather than factual land of plenty in a novel circa the 16th century. So was it named after Las Sargas de Esplandian? Historians aren't quite certain. It's possible Spanish explorers knew of the book, which was something of a bestseller in its day. But it's also possible the name was derived from the Latin words calida fornax, meaning hot furnace, or californo, a Native American phrase meaning high hill or native land. But it's probably worth pointing out that the name would have been given to what is now the Baja California Peninsula. As the Spanish ventured further north, the region of California spread. Colorado is kind of an easy state name to puzzle out. It's Spanish for colored red, which was considered relevant because it was once thought a reddish tint could be seen from water coming down from the mountains. Congress chose the name in 1861 when it was made a territory, and the name remained when it became a state in 1876. Connecticut is a nickname-heavy state. People have referred to it as the Nutmeg State, the Constitution State, and the Land of Steady Habits. But its actual name comes from the Mohegan word Quinatucket, or upon the Long Tidal River. Delaware is home to a few firsts, including the first state to ratify the Constitution and the first to sell peaches commercially, both equally important. It's also the first state on the list named after a person. When explorer Samuel Argall wanted a name for the bay and its associated river flowing through the state, he chose to name it after Virginia Governor Thomas West, who carried the title Lord or Baron de la Warre. That was likely taken from the Old French meaning of the war or warrior. In the 1800s, singer and lyricist Flo Rida discovered the Sunshine State. Just kidding. While that would be amazing, Florida was instead named by Juan Ponce de Leon, who arrived in the area in 1513 while probably not searching for the famed Fountain of Youth, as detailed in our video of misconceptions about Florida. Ponce de Leon named it La Florida, which means flowery in Spanish. He chose the name both because it had good woodlands and because he sighted it around Pascua Florida, or Easter time. Georgia is a tip of the cap to George II of England, who granted it charter in 1732 as a means of sending debtors to a North American colony to try and become financially whole again. So why isn't it the state of George? Because the IA suffix means state of. The country of Georgia, meanwhile, gets its name from a Persian word, maybe meaning wolf, that in medieval Western Europe maybe got conflated with St. George. Hawaii may have the coolest state name, but it's also among the most puzzling to fully identify. Some believe it was named for the Polynesian man Hawaii Loa, who is said to have discovered the Hawaiian Islands. Others think it's from a compound of hava, or homeland, and ii, meaning small. But most scholars today look at Proto-Polynesian languages and suggest it derives from something meaning traditional homeland, because similar-looking words pop up in other Polynesian languages. Idaho, the land of spuds, has one of the most contested names of all the states. A little over a decade after the then territory was named, a newspaper report emerged that the author's eccentric friend, George Willing, came up with it. Supposedly, he was advocating for the area in Congress when the naming question came up. At that precise moment, a young girl named Ida ran in, and Willing proclaimed, "Ida, ho, come and see me." He realized Idaho was perfect and suggested it, claiming the word meant gem of the mountains, which it doesn't. You'd think that story was so obviously true that we should move on, except weeks later, an Idaho newspaper said that nobody in the territory had ever heard of Willing. But the story doesn't end there. The moniker was actually an early contender for the official name of Colorado, complete with the gem explanation. Willing wasn't the official delegate then either, but according to historian Earl H. Ellis, he went to Washington, D.C. and pretended he was. Since this fact is already getting long, I'm going to be skipping some of the more colorful figures of the West, but according to Ellis, around the time Idaho was being thrown around as a name for Colorado, it became trendy in that part of the world, with one girl even being named Nettie Idaho Jackson. Nettie's aunt fell in love with the name, and said aunt's husband just so happened to be a prominent politician who would go on to become the first governor of the Idaho Territory. According to their son, when the name question came up for this new territory, the suggestions were Lafayette, Montana, and Idaho. At the mention of Idaho, Nettie's aunt expressed a desire for that name in honor of her niece, and everyone accepted her wish. Long story short, the best guess is Idaho is named after a failed alternate for Colorado, and influenced by Nettie Idaho Jackson, who was named after a failed alternate for Colorado. Where that name came from is anyone's guess, but the only real explanation ever given is the clearly fictitious Ida, ho. Illinois is home to the late filmmaker John Hughes, and where many of his movies are set, something Hughes favored to avoid his movies becoming too generic Hollywood. But this isn't about movies, it's about state names, damn it. Illinois may have come from the word Iranwiwa, which means speaking in an ordinary way. The R later changed to an L, and then the word probably got borrowed into an Ojibwe dialect that dropped the wa. To French ears, Illinois sounded like Illinois, and that pronunciation is what stuck. Indiana is probably the most overt reference to Native Americans in a state name. It means land of the Indians. It's also the land of Colonel Sanders. The KFC founder was born in Henryville before starting his chicken empire, but I think the Independent Film Channel would have had a problem if he had named it Indiana Fried Chicken, so we have KFC. Iowa, aka the Hawkeye State, was named for the Iowa tribe. Iowa could come from the word Iowa, or sleepy, which is what the Dakota called the Iowa Nation, but the Iowa actually refer to themselves as the Bakojay, which means ashy snow. If you think Arkansas and Kansas have some connective tissue, you're correct. Remember that the Quapaw inspired Arkansas. According to the linguist William Bright, the starting A in Arkansas is an Algonquian prefix for ethnic groups, and essentially, the Kansaw part is a name for that particular branch of the Siouan family regardless of tribal affiliation. The word itself probably came from one of these Siouan languages, which is why there's a closely related tribe to the Quapaw called the Kansa, hence Kansas. Kentucky is one of the 4 commonwealths in the 50 states, and its moniker is among the most mysterious of state names. It's possible it comes from the Wyandot word Kentatun, or land of tomorrow. but that's unconfirmed, and some believe the word actually means meadow, prairie, or even river of blood. That last one is probably not great, especially if you're looking to attract tourists. It's time to invoke Louisiana, which might mean it's time to attempt a Nolans accent. Just kidding, I don't want you to turn this video off. Louisiana was claimed back in 1682. In honor of King Louis XIV, it was named La Louisiane, or the Land of Louis. Now it's really the Land of Milk. That's the state's official drink. The name of Stephen King's favorite haunt, Maine, comes from either French or English. If English, it's possible it refers to the mainland, or a village on England's coast with the same name. But in 2001, when the state legislature declared a Franco-American Day in the state, they proclaimed it was named after a French province. Maryland is another one of the few states with a clear connection to a singular person. It was named for Henrietta Maria, the queen and wife of Charles I, who signed a 1632 charter establishing it as a colony. Henrietta Land just doesn't quite hit the same. Massachusetts is another commonwealth, and its name is derived from the Massachusetts tribe. It means on or about the Great Hill. A slightly more intriguing name story can be found in one of the state's central lakes. The lake, commonly known as Lake Webster, has many alternate names, including this one, which is the longest name of any geographical feature in the US, and I will not even try to say it. Loosely translated, it means staying within fishing boundaries. Michigan comes from Michigama or Michigama, the Ojibwe tribe word for Great Lake or Large Lake. It's long been a state of industry, from Detroit's car plants to the cereal companies of Battle Creek. Thank you, Michigan, for grape nuts. Minnesota originated with the Dakota, who named the Minnesota River after Minnie, their word for water. The second part is harder. If it's soda, like most people pronounce it, it would be sky-tinted or clear, with the idea being the river is so clear and calm it reflects the sky, or maybe has a blue from sediments. If it's shouta, that would be cloudy, probably referencing mists coming off the river. One other name-related tidbit from the state is that actress Winona Ryder is named after the town of Winona. Another water-inspired state name, Mississippi, comes from something like the Ojibwe word Messipi, or Big River. Fitting. Missouri is the name of a Siouan-speaking tribe that comes from another tribe's name for them, Uimesorita. Some thought that meant muddy water, while others argued that it meant something closer to large canoes, with the MISS meaning big, like in Mississippi. That's probably not quite right either, though. And it probably actually means dugout canoe, or more literally, log canoe. When Congress was in the process of establishing Montana as its own official territory in 1864, Ohio Representative James Ashley claimed the name was a Spanish word meaning mountainous. A couple weeks later, though, Michigan Senator Jacob Howard said the name came from Latin. Montana is Latin for mountainous, and the closest Spanish word to Montana is montaña, meaning mountain. But it's not clear who originally coined the name and which language inspired them. All that said, Spanish itself comes from Latin, so either way, Montana has Latin roots. Nebraska is said to derive from one of two Siouan names for the Platte River, the Omaha, Nebraska, or the Otto, Nebraska. Both mean water flat, a nod to how smoothly parts of the river flow through the region. Nevada is Spanish for snowy or snow-clad. That might seem like a joke to anyone only familiar with the state's desert expanses, but Nevada is also home to various mountains, and those mountains are home to snow. The name was specifically inspired by the backdrop of the Sierra Nevada, which runs along Nevada's western border with California. Though that range is mostly confined to California, a little piece, known as the Carson Range, does dip into the Silver State. In 1623, Captain John Mason secured a land grant in the New World and sent groups of people across the pond to settle it. Mason was from Hampshire, England, so you can probably guess where this is going. The region became New Hampshire, but Mason himself never saw it. He died in 1635 before ever making the trip. There's a small town in New Hampshire named after him, but the more notable namesake may be Mason the Moose on the Loose, the mascot for a grade school curriculum on New Hampshire history. Mason wears glasses and loves eating birch bark. Naturally, his favorite book is If You Give a Moose a Muffin. Here's a free idea for a sequel: If You Give an Englishman a Land Grant. Actually, never mind. Too much death and destruction for a kid's book. New Jersey is named after Jersey, one of the Channel Islands. Jersey was the birthplace of George Carteret, who also served as the island's lieutenant governor and eventually got the rights to half of what's now New Jersey. Historians are split on how Old Jersey got its name. Some say it's from Caesarea, the Roman word for the island, or a neighboring one. But it may be Viking in origin. A is Old Norse for island, so Jersey could mean something like Geyer's Island. 16th century Spanish explorers dubbed the region that includes New Mexico, Nuevo Mexico. That's weird because it's probably the only 16th century place that has new attached to an indigenous name, which references the Valley of Mexico, basically modern Mexico City. There are a few competing theories for why. One idea is that the Spanish hoped this new territory would be as rich as the land they had recently conquered. Or maybe it's a word that Spain's Nahuatl guides use that had been translated as new, but could also mean something more like original. In that case, it would be a reference to the Aztec migration story. Then the Spanish might have heard about this story and set out to find new riches. Brace yourselves. This next fact may come as a shock. New York City and New York State were named after the same thing. Okay, what might actually surprise you is that the moniker was only indirectly inspired by York, England. When England wrested control of New Amsterdam from the Dutch in 1664, King Charles II gave it to his brother James, Duke of York, the future King James II. In honor of the Duke, New Amsterdam became New York, the city. The surrounding area, formerly New Netherland, became New York, the state. The Carolinas have multiple Kings Charles in their history. 16th century French settlers originally christened the region Caroline after France's King Charles IX. Then, when England's King Charles I issued a land grant to the area in 1629, he called it Carolina after himself. The plan was to colonize Carolina and put it on hold while England dealt with civil war. But Charles I's son, King Charles II, succeeded in the task in 1663. According to some sources, the final iteration of the name Carolina is a tribute to Charles II. But others suggest that he more or less just kept the title his father had given it. Carolina was formally split into North and South Carolina in 1712. More than 175 years later, in 1889, the Dakota Territory was formally split into North and South Dakota. The reasons why could fill their own video, so let's just chalk it up to irreconcilable differences. Neither state really wanted to change its name, in part because people associated Dakota with high-quality products, like California raisins or Florida orange juice, as University of North Dakota history professor Kimberly Porter told Time. So they settled on North and South Dakota. The word itself, borrowed from the Dakota people of the region, means friendly or allied. Ironic for a divorced couple. Ohio, the state, was named after the Ohio River, which got its moniker from the Seneca Nation's name for it, Ohio, derived from a term meaning good river. And you know what? It is a good river. It supplies drinking water to roughly 5 million people. Thanks, Ohio River. Choctaw chief Kiliahote, also known as Allen Wright, coined the term Oklahoma in 1866. It's a fusion of two Choctaw words, Okla, meaning people, and Homa, or Humma, meaning red. So in literal terms, Oklahoma means red people. But the Choctaw Nation Historic Preservation Department offered up an alternative interpretation in a 2023 issue of the Choctaw newspaper Biskinik. Traditionally, Humma was a kind of war title given to Choctaw people who didn't retreat. In this context, Oklahoma translates to people who do not retreat. Oregon's origin is kind of a mystery. The earliest known reference to the word is from a 1765 funding proposal written by Robert Rogers, an American-born British Army officer, to King George III. Rogers wanted money for an expedition to locate the Northwest Passage, hopefully by following a river that Native Americans called Ouragan, according to Rogers. But it's not clear where Rogers heard the term or even what river it originally referred to. One theory is that it comes from the Algonquian word Waurigan for the Ohio River. Another is that it hails from Ooligan, a Chinnequawa term for candlefish that could have gotten co-opted for one of their habitats, too, British Columbia's Fraser River. Whatever the case, Rogers eventually enlisted one Jonathan Carver for the Northwest Passage expedition, and Carver mentioned the Oregon, or River of the West, in his published journals from the trip. So, Carver gets credit for popularizing Oregon among English speakers, but we're still pretty much in the dark about the etymological Oregon Trail before that. Oh, and if you want a detailed history of the actual video game Oregon Trail, check out our episode with Throwback, all about it. You might have assumed that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was named after its founder, William Penn, but it was actually named for his father, also William Penn. Penn Sr. had fronted the king a bunch of money to restore the Navy in the aftermath of England's Civil War, and Charles repaid it after Penn's death by granting his son land in the New World. Sylvania comes from the Latin word for woods, so Pennsylvania means Penn's woods. Rhode Island, the state, which isn't an island, plays host to Rhode Island, the island, which is, although locals generally call it Aquidneck Island. Aquidneck is thought to have come from a Narragansett word, meaning on the island. The island was named Rhode Island before the state, christened by English minister Roger Williams and his cohorts when they established a colony there in the 1630s. But where they got the name remains a subject of debate. One theory points to the explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano, who visited the region back in 1524. While there, he noted a small island, today's Block Island, that was similar in size to the Greek island of Rhodes. The other theory involves the namesake of Block Island itself, Adrian Block, a Dutch explorer who investigated the region in 1614. It's often said that Block named Block Island or Aquidneck Island Root Island, Dutch for Red Island, after its red clay or red cliffs. But what really happened is more convoluted because we don't have any written account from Block himself. What we do have is a 1625 breakdown of the region by Dutch geographer Johannes de Laat, who presumably did have access to Block's journals. In it, de Laat mentions this phrase, meaning a reddish island. Sure, it's possible the phrase got anglicized to Rhode Island, but it's also possible that Williams and friends took Verrazzano's nod to Rhodes and ran with it. Either way, Block didn't name any part of the region Rhode Island, nor did Verrazzano name it Rhode Island. All these roads lead to nowhere. Tennessee was named after a Cherokee village, Tanasi, though nobody's quite sure what the word itself meant. Here's a bonus Tennessee name origin. Playwright Tennessee Williams was born Thomas Lanier Williams III. People nicknamed him Tennessee in college because of his strong Southern accent. He did briefly live there, but he spent most of his early life in Mississippi and Missouri. Missouri Williams doesn't sound quite right. The Dakotas aren't the only states with a friendly etymology. Texas derives from Tesha, a word used by the Hasinai for friends or allies. Spanish settlers Hispanicized it to Tejas, and then English speakers anglicized it to Texas. And now you also know why the Lone Star State's motto is friendship. Utah is also likely an anglicized Spanish term. Utah, which is what Spanish settlers called the Ute people who lived in the Great Basin. It's possible that Utah itself came from an Apache word that referred to people living high up, but not everyone agrees with that origin story. Another theory is that Utah meant meat eaters. Vermont comes from the French for green mountain, though it doesn't seem to have been used by the region's 17th century French settlers. The earliest known reference to Vermont is from a 1777 broadside by Thomas Young, an American revolutionary who may have coined the term as a nod to the patriot militia, the Green Mountain Boys. It's often pointed out that Vermont is pretty shoddy French, as the common construction would be montagne verte. But in the naming of things, there's precedent for both mont, archaic French for mountain, and for the adjective coming before the noun. Think Beaumont and Belmont. There are also plenty of examples of vert getting shortened to ver. I mean, if you're making up a word, why follow spelling and grammar rules anyway? England's most famous bachelorette lent her name to the Commonwealth of Virginia, Queen Elizabeth I, aka the Virgin Queen. It might seem weird that 16th century explorers singled out the virgin of it all instead of going with, like, Eliza Land. But Elizabeth's singledom was sort of a selling point for her reign. She was presented as a Virgin Mary-esque figure who was married to the game being ruling England. The word Virginia also offered a convenient metaphor for what colonizers considered virginal lands, theirs for the taking. Look, I said it was a convenient metaphor, not that it was apt or inoffensive. Originally, the term Virginia covered a hefty chunk of the eastern seaboard, but the borders shrank as that land got parceled out to various settlers. West Virginia didn't become a thing until the Civil War, when, after years of feeling ignored, Virginia's western counties opposed Virginia's secession from the Union. They decided to form their own state, which was admitted to the Union on June 20th, 1863. Other names were considered, including Kanawha, after the region's Kanawha River, and Allegheny, after the Allegheny River. But many residents still strongly identified as Virginians, so legislators just went with West Virginia. Washington, D.C. traces its history back to the 1790s. The District of Columbia, back then the Territory of Columbia, was named after a popular poetic term for, and female personification of, the United States, Columbia, who was named after Christopher Columbus. And Washington, the city itself, was named in honor of then-President George Washington. Fast forward to the 1850s. Out west, Oregon Territory inhabitants who lived north of the Columbus River broke off and formed their own territory, mostly so they'd have better political representation that would cater to their specific needs. The proposed name for this new block was the Columbia Territory, after the Columbia River. But Congress said, sorry, no, we already have a Territory of Columbia. That will just confuse everyone. So they named it Washington instead. And nobody has ever confused Washington, D.C. for Washington State. Ha ha ha. Over the last few centuries, people have put forth so many different theories about the origin of the word Wisconsin that it's hard to pin down the truth. But here's the version that the Wisconsin Historical Society supports. It comes from a word the Miami people used for what's now the Wisconsin River. It meant something like, this stream meanders through something red, with that something red likely being the red sandstone formations located in modern-day Wisconsin dells. 17th century French missionary Jacques Marquette first wrote the term as Mescousing. That eventually got anglicized to Wisconsin. Probably for the best. There are already too many states that start with M as it is. The word Wyoming is definitely of Native American origin, though the details are up for debate. According to the online etymology dictionary, it's from this Muncie, Delaware word, meaning at the big river flat. But it's also been suggested to have come from this Delaware word, which referred to large plains. Colonists adopted the term Wyoming for Pennsylvania's Wyoming Valley during the 18th century. And then a Pennsylvania-born Ohio congressman proposed it for what became Wyoming Territory in the 1860s. Wyoming, the state, has rivers and plains too, so it's not a total non sequitur. And that covers all 50 states. Thanks for joining us on this road trip across the country. Make sure to subscribe to Mental Floss for even more videos just like this, and I'll see you next time.